I got a feeling our rankings are going to be similar to whoever's watching this. Starting off at number 6, my least favourite was actually the detective. So like I said, the story was a little bit confusing, which took me out of it. I didn't understand entirely the AI and the technical and the hybrid and the freaking, when they go inside the matrix, I don't even know what they call it, I can't remember. It's basically like a virtual reality in the world of Hyperion. Because Dan Simmons takes all these concepts from our real world and just expands them crazy. So the story reminded me of so many different things, like The Matrix, for example. It's like a detective noir story with cyberpunk mixed in. So the woman, it has a great hook, Braun Lamia, I believe her name is, who comes from one of the most densest, has one of the highest gravity densities in their like hegemony, which I thought was interesting, which means she's like super tough, super strong, and she's quite badass as well. And a hybrid, which is a human, like an actual human, it's not a cyborg or anything like that, but it has the mind of an AI, which is just a crazy concept. So he goes to this detective, Braun Lamia, and asks her to solve his death. That's a really interesting premise. I like the mystery, and I was kind of hooked on it, but I don't know why, for some reason the story just didn't click with me, even though it was good. Maybe it was the romance. There's a lot of, not a lot, but this is more of a romance story. But Braun Lamia is a pretty cool character, I think. I think we see a lot more of her in the Fall of Hyperion. But something amazing about this story in particular is that we learn a lot about the technical and the AI and how they work and what their motives are and why they want, what their interest in Hyperion is and why they wanted to kill Johnny. So all of that was really fascinating, I thought. The parts that didn't go over my head, that is. And there's like this kind of mystery with Hyperion where it's kind of like has a relationship with the identity of the author, John Keats, and that is who the hybrid is kind of modeled after. So yeah, he wants to go to Hyperion because it's kind of just like something linked there in his subconscious or in his memories or something. It's not actually fully explained, but it's like a city of poets in Hyperion, and I think like one of the places is named after Keats. So with the AIs, we find out that there are like 3 subsets of these AIs in the technical. So the first one wants to work with the humans and believes that we should like get along and create like a healthy relationship, which is kind of what they have now. The second group of AIs think the complete opposite, and they think that humans are a threat and that the AI should get rid of us. And the third one is the most interesting, and they seem kind of indifferent to the humans, and their goal is to create the ultimate AI, this god level type AI that has complete predictive abilities, like 100%. It's revealed in one of the stories, I think it was this one, but I'm not sure, that the AIs have a predictive ability to like 97%. And I thought that was absolutely insane. How can it be that like accurate, 97%? They're obsessed with Hyperion because it's like a complete anomaly to these AIs. And the AIs are like far beyond anything that we could conceive of. Like they built the Farcaster technology, which the humans have not been able to understand all this time later in the story. And I think they've been around for centuries. They go into this metaverse. I don't know, like, I can't remember what it's called in the terminology in the book, but like in our world, it's like basically a VR metaverse. Something that was cool was how they described the AIs as being like gods in this realm, which makes sense. And they have humans that kind of go in there and like, the AIs are looking down on them from the clouds like gods, and it's got all these like crazy imageries and highways of data and stuff like that. But number 5 is the soldier. It's interesting. This story and the detective started off the most interesting, probably for me, because the story starts off in war. So 𝐒𝐨𝐬𝐜𝐢𝐚𝐥 is part of the force, which is what they call the military arm of the hegemony. and he's training up to become an officer. And they have these simulations, which is quite similar to what I was talking about before, but they use them for like war games and drills and practice and stuff like that. And so it starts off when he's in a battle with the French and English from like, I don't remember when, but it's like medieval times. Like he's got a sword and a shield. I thought that was really cool. So like I said earlier, how Dan Simmons manages to mix up the settings and genre throughout the book so many times, and that's through the structure of it, and that's just a really clever way. But 𝐒𝐶had is climbing his way up through the ranks, and he meets this woman in the simulation called Moneta, and they make love, and he's just lusting after her. And again, she's like a complete enigma. After they're done, she disappears, and so 𝐒𝐶had is looking for her, and she shows up not often, but every now and again when he's in a simulation. All the while, he's kind of progressing through his military career and becoming distinguished through just through his own merit and skill. I think he's sent to a world to fight an Ulster invasion, and he becomes known as the Butcher because he puts it down violently, I guess, or something like that. I think he gets injured in the process, and he is being repaired. They got like this really high-tech, just high-tech science that's able to repair like the most crazy injuries. So he's being repaired, I think in space on like a ship in a tube or something like that. And the ship is attacked. He wakes up, manages to kill his attackers, but in the process, the ship crash lands on Hyperion. And so every story has something to do with Hyperion in some way, and this is 𝐒𝐶had's way. So he wakes up in Hyperion, in the city of poets, which I mentioned earlier, and this woman takes him to the time tombs. I think I mentioned it, but I didn't explain it. The time tombs are these structures that have been around for tens of thousands of years, and they have an anti-entropic field surrounding them, which means, I think, that they're unaffected by time. And these tombs have been moving backwards in time for a very long time. And this is where the strike creature resides. And I think some of the characters in the story think that these time tombs were sent back to the past from the future, which really reminded me of Terminator. Like the strike is like Terminator, but 1,000 times worse. Well, not 1,000, but it's like 10 times scarier. But yeah, they meet the strike, and then this part's weird. Fedman 𝐒𝐶had is given a suit by Moneta, and the strike turns up, and then they do some killing. Every time there's like a battle, 𝐒𝐶had like has this crazy lust, and he makes love to this woman. So I think they do that again. But then whilst he's doing this, she kind of starts transforming, and he's getting cut, and she transforms into the strike. And it's like, what the hell is going on? I think whilst this is happening, 𝐒𝐶had has like some visions of a crazy war coming, which is probably the war between the Ulsters and the hegemony. But yeah, he kills these Ulsters, makes love to the woman. Then I think he like passes out when he has this like vision. Yeah, after that, he's kind of a legend. He's kind of infamous for his deeds as a soldier over the years. But after that, he kind of just fades into obscurity. So the soldier's tale was a bit weird. I didn't really fully get it, but like, who is Moneta? Something that I love about Hyperion is just how much mystery there is in the story overall. Yeah, mystery can be hit and miss for me, but the mysteries in this book had me completely captivated. My fourth favorite, and this one, I don't know, it could actually be even number 3. It was the console. And I talked about earlier how time is a theme in this book, and I loved how it was explored in the console's story. The structure of the console story is similar to the structure of the priest story, in that he doesn't tell his own story, he tells someone else's story first before his own. And we find out that he's telling his granddad's story, and he tells the story about his granddad and his grandmom, how they met, their lives, and they fell in love. But the interesting thing about it, and the time related theme, is that his granddad is like a contractor, and he's working on another world, I believe. And when he leaves Ciri, which is the woman, to go to this other world, he incurs like a tremendous amount of time debt. So when he goes to this world and works, I don't know, like say it's 3 months traveling there, because they're traveling faster than light speed, and he's there for 6 months and he comes back. Due to time dilation, he's been gone away from Siri for like 10 years, or I don't remember exactly how long, but it's really crazy. So I think all in all, he only has like a few encounters with his woman. They call them reunions. I think it's like 5 or 6 or 7, around that number. So every time he breaks up from her, like they're years and years apart, and we see the perspective of Siri, and she says something like, I understand the nature of your work, that you had to go away and come back, but you could have at least acted like you were not so damn surprised to see me when you saw me. So yeah, this is a really kind of peculiar love story. And it gets really complicated because Siri becomes like okay, I'm a bit hazy on this part of the book. I don't know exactly how it happens, but she becomes like some public figure, and they like romanticize their relationship. Something I loved about this as well is how different they are. The console's granddad is a man of the hegemony, he's a man of science, and Siri is a woman of people and nature and ecology and life, and their values are kind of different. Not crazy different, but she doesn't really understand the hegemony, and he doesn't really understand her way of life, which will come into play later on in like the second half of the story, which is the part that really got me hooked. Yeah, it's crazy. They actually have children together, and so he sees his children like not very often at all. It seems like he really loved this woman just way above everything else, way above his own children. They're barely mentioned. He doesn't even seem like he likes them. But the story can be kind of confusing because of its non-linear structure. So we're really jumping all over the place, like through his flashbacks and his time on the colony, and back seeing like it just jumps decades. At first I was really confused because I didn't know what was going on, but then I kind of caught the hang of it, and it makes sense it really fits the theme of the story, the book overall, but particularly this story a lot as well. The story overall is about hegemony coming to this world and making it part of the empire, basically. So it's not very different to like the British going to colonize some place in the Caribbean or something. Like, it gets rid of their culture and their way of life. So, like, it will destroy the ecology of the planet. It will destroy, take the natural resources and bleed the planet dry. And something that's amazing about this planet is that like, there's loads of water on this planet, and there's like these species of like really intelligent sea creatures. It actually reminded me of the new Avatar film, The Way of Water. I wasn't a huge fan of that film, but there's some similarities here between this story and that. But the console, I think he's kind of, long story short, by the way, this is going on too long. He's convinced of his wife's way of life, and he sees that what the hegemony are doing, that like, they're really gonna cause a lot more harm than good on this planet. And so yeah, he becomes an enemy of the hegemony because they do a brutal campaign of colonizing the world, because the people there kind of fight back against the colonization. They destroy the Farcaster, and so force comes down and like pretty much destroys everything. It's revealed that the console is the grandchild of Siri and the other dude. So he's just kind of been plotting, and it reveals why he doesn't like the hegemony and that they're kind of like oppressive. And oh, actually we learn a lot of stuff in this chapter. Like, for example, the destruction of Earth might not have been an accident, that they destroy all other intelligent life in the universe. So like the intelligent species I mentioned on the water life, and that's why the owls are such a threat to them. But yeah, there was a lot of revelations about the world in the console's tale, so I really ended up loving it. But let me move on again, because I was trying not to make this review that long, but clearly it's not working. So number 3 is The Poet. Like I said, it could be changed with the console, but this one again I loved. The Poet is just a really funny character. He kind of stands out. He's like really eccentric and bizarre and crass and abrasive, but at least he's funny. and he's by far the oldest of the group. He comes from old Earth, which in the story is just Earth, but it was destroyed centuries before the story began by a black hole that was eating Earth out from the inside out, or something like that. But the poet, he comes from an extremely wealthy family back on Earth, so he didn't have to struggle while Earth was dying, and then he left, but his family was in debt, so he thought that by going to cryogenic sleep, it would, I can't remember why or how exactly, but he thought he would be out of debt through, I can't remember why, but when he wakes up, it's the exact opposite. Like, he's in a lot of debt and he becomes like a slave on this random world, just carrying out slave labor in the worst conditions. And the cryogenic fugue messed him up, so he only knew how to say like 7 words, and they were all like curse words, like shit and piss and whatever. But it was really funny. Like, I think the writing in here specifically was really creative, and the poet's voice was very, like I said, he's funny and abrasive and bizarre, but he's obsessed with his art and his poem. He creates a friendship with this guy called 𝐒𝐨𝐜𝐿𝐷. I can't remember how, but he ends up on Hyperion. And whilst he's there, there's like these crazy murders and disappearances going on, and they're trying to find the murderer. But then they find out that it's actually the Strike. And so the Strike legend starts to spread all throughout the hegemony. But the poet becomes absolutely convinced that he's writing the word of God, and that the Strike is his muse, and he gives him like unlimited creative freedom to write his poem, and it's like the words just are writing themselves, like he's brimming with ideas to get down. Yeah, he writes a book about the dying of Earth, and I think somehow he ends up in a coma, and then some rich person takes his work and realizes that it's actually great work, and they manage to kind of make his book a hit. But it's not just a hit, it's like one of the most successful books in this universe. Like, it sells billions of copies, and it makes him like extremely wealthy. So I briefly mentioned the Farcasters, but you can have like a Farcaster home, if that kind of makes sense. So you have portals in your home to all these different worlds, which I can imagine is extremely expensive. But the poet had this. I think he mentions that he had access to 35 worlds from his own home. I thought that was really crazy. Like, imagine that. And he just goes on like this crazy binge of like drugs and women, and like it's just craziness. Like, he turns himself into like, I don't remember, some crazy creature, like a satyr or something. Like I said, the poet believes that he's getting inspiration from the Strike to write his stories. And he believes that they're like prophetic in nature, and that it's his life's mission to do this, and he's completely obsessed. Like, this is all he cares about. And then the character of 𝐒𝐨𝐜𝐿𝐷, which was a kind of a weird character, but he believes that, I think he believes like the same thing as the poet, but his writings are causing like all these strange phenomena and the deaths that happen, so he starts to burn it. Yeah, whilst he's burning the paper, the Strike turns up out of nowhere and just takes 𝐒𝐨𝐜𝐿𝐷 away. Yeah, the poet's tale, the way it goes through time, I didn't actually mention this a lot, but since he's from old Earth, his story spans like centuries. Like, at first the group doesn't even know they don't believe how old he is. Moving on, and I think this is many people's number 1, but for me it's number 2. It was really great, and it's the Scholar's story. Now, this one was very emotional. So it follows the scholar, 𝐒𝐨𝐜𝐿𝐷. He lives on this kind of, I can't remember if it's an outback world, but it doesn't have like the kind of technology and population density and like Farcasters and access. It's just not as developed and populated as the other places. So it will be seen as like the equivalent of the countryside in our world or something. And he lives kind of a peaceful, idyllic life with his wife and his daughter Rachel. And eventually she wants to go to Hyperion and like study the time tombs. She is infected by the time tombs. Something happens and they open up. And I think she also sees the Strike, which is terrifying. But I think there's something I forgot to mention in the Consul's tale about how all these tales are interlinked, and I think the console like caused Rachel's disease, because there's that moment where he goes to the time tombs himself and he opens them up by killing the ousters because they might not have opened it. So I don't actually know if that was at the same time she was there, but it probably was. But anyway, because of this, her like exposure to the time tomb, she contracts this extremely rare disease in which every morning where she wakes up, she forgets, like, she has like amnesia, and she can't remember anything from, basically each morning her memory is being erased, but it's only being erased not of her past, but of every event that's happened in her future. So for example, and she is aging backwards. So for example, she had a boyfriend when she was, say, 25, and each day she wakes up, she remembers less and less about him until, like, I don't know, 2 years down, say they've been dating for 2 years, 2 years down the line, she won't have any clue who he is. And this guy loves her, and she, well, did love him, but then she don't know who the hell he is, and he has to re-explain it to her, and she starts to distrust him, and it just sounds like an awful predicament to be in. A bit of a side note, they have like a great relationship. It's a great family. I think that's what draws people in. It's such like, it's in some ways a really normal story. Like, it's very relatable and very emotional, and doesn't have the crazy high concept like something like Lamia's story would have. But they're still there. But I think that the unity of the family is something that's really relatable and appealing to readers and myself as well. But the parents basically, especially Sol, puts all of their life becomes about Rachel now. It takes everything just to help her maintain her life, maintain her sanity. And eventually she asks that when she wakes up, she sees like recordings and stuff like that of herself explaining to her what her condition is, and like telling her about what's going on, how this happened, and it emotionally wrecks her every time. She has to remember that she loved this guy that she doesn't even know a single thing about, and that she was like in this crazy accident and she doesn't know who she is, and she's disorientated and stuff. So eventually she decides to tell her parents that just don't let me know, please let me live in ignorance. I can't go through this every morning. And that's what they do. So they get like this cell therapy or something like that to make them younger, so that, say like, I don't know, 10 years down the line, she's now 15. When she wakes up, it'll be weird if her parents looked 60 instead of 45 or whatever they're supposed to look like. And they redecorate their room to like, or their house to make it look like she did when she was 15. And yeah, it's just like fascinating the lengths they have to go to protect their daughter. All the while, by the way, Sol is out in the hegemony looking for a cure, doing the most, going on talk shows, going on the world web, traveling to all these different worlds, and everyone is obsessed with his daughter, because it's become like a viral media story because of just how bizarre her condition is, and I don't think it's ever happened to anyone before. So Sol, in his plight, kind of becomes famous, him and his daughter, but all they want to do is just kind of live out their lives in peace and in some way help their daughter and try to fix this problem that she has. And I love that, like, we're introduced to the baby in the beginning of the book, and then like halfway, or probably not halfway, like further away, I'm like, oh, that baby is Rachel, that's crazy. And she's like an infant. Like, what happens when she reaches like 1 day old and she goes into the inverse of her birth? It's like, what? How can she not be born? But yeah, the concept in this story was really amazing. We found out more about the world, and it was wonderfully unique and really captivating, and it had that emotional resonance that was lacking a little bit in the other stories, which is why I think it's a lot of people's favourites. The scholar is having a constant conversation with God about the story of Abraham, which I thought was really fascinating. And I think it's like the question of how could God ask Abraham to do a seemingly evil deed of proof of his allegiance to God or something like along those lines. And it kind of mirrors his situation in the book, in the chapter. And he's like, how could you do this to like an innocent person? In his dreams, he keeps having these weird visions that is telling him to bring his daughter to Hyperion. Like, it's pretty weird. This whole story was amazing. It took me a little bit, some of these stories took me a little bit to get into, but once I did, they were just like very, very rewarding. And this one is probably maybe the most rewarding, or my number one, which obviously you know what it is through its absence, but it is the first story in the book, and it's the priest's tale. So, the priest, Father Leonard Hoyt, like I mentioned with the consul, tells a story first of Father, I don't remember his name, Paul Dior or something like that. And he goes to Hyperion. He's been exiled from the church, but as his punishment he has to go to Hyperion, and he wants to seek out the 𝐒𝐻 race of primitive people that he's heard about. And there's kind of like some myth and legend around them, but no one's been able to confirm it properly. They're kind of rumors. And when he gets there, he has a guide, and he goes through the forest fires, which is just great, like geography and world building setting. I thought it was really cool. I haven't seen anything like it, but his guide dies whilst he was sleeping. His throat is slit, and he meets the 𝐒𝐻, these people who call themselves the 10. I think there's like 70 of them, or 30, I don't remember how much, but there's a very specific number, let's just say that. But whilst he's there, he starts to like find out more and more about the 𝐒𝐻, and each new thing he finds out adds like a profound level of just complete confusion, and like everything they say and do is completely confusing. And I was just so invested in this mystery, like that doesn't make sense at all. And they think that they're really stupid. They've like devolved as human beings. So like their mental capacity and probably physical and like emotional capacity is close to zero. But he figures out that they're like androgynous. They're neither male nor female. They're all the exact same age. They're all the exact same height, and they have like, there's no children, grandparents, uncles. He's like, how do they reproduce? How do they maintain the society? So he's kind of like a prisoner there as well. But eventually they take him down to these caves. I don't remember if they're the time tunes. I don't think they are, but there's these caves that are really like mysterious and just creepy. And he finds like the cruciform. So they think he's one of the cruciform because he's a priest, and they find him with a cross on his chest. And it's revealed that they all have these crosses on their chest also. So they take him to the caves, and there's like all these crosses on the walls, and they look like they're alive, like they're part of the ecology of the world. And they take one off and they attach it to him, and to his complete horror, he realizes that it starts melding with his skin and becoming a part of him. And he tests it. He tests the cruciform on his chest and realizes that it's part of his DNA, and he tries to scratch it off, and it's like just scratching his own skin. It's like, wow, this is crazy. He tries to leave, but then there's like an immense pain that comes from the cruciform, so he literally can't leave. And he figures out that these people come back to life, like he literally watched it happen. So the whole story is just completely nuts. Like, I think this is the one with the tinge of horror in it, because it's not like scary horror, but it's just like almost psychological horror. Like, that is kind of terrifying if that were to happen to anyone. So in his attempts to escape, he figures out that he can't go far from the cruciform or that location because of the extreme pain. By the way, when they put the cruciform on this guy, he also meets the Shrike. These people see the Shrike as a deity, and they're like bowing down, but the guy's just like completely like, what the? He's just staring at it, like, what is that thing? He also thinks, like, he's excited when he first finds this place. He thinks that because in his story he's concerned about dying of his religion and the church, and he thinks that this will reinvigorate his entire faith and people by seeing that this existed, this Catholicism and the cross and all this existed long before humans. But then he realizes that it potentially probably has nothing to do with that. But yeah, in his attempts to escape, I don't remember exactly what happens here, but he somehow gets himself like impaled on a tree. He's just going through agony for years because of the cruciform won't let him die, but he's like stuck to this tree being burnt or electrocuted or something like that. I can't remember. But yeah, this story was horrifying, completely captivating, and just like, it will stick in my head for a long time. I think that Father Hoyt, he finds, priest was like either a friend or a mentor or something, someone he looked up to, but he finds him and he releases him from his agony after all these years. He allows him to die, but then he contracts the cruciform virus, if you will. And yeah, so it's mentioned that he looks really sick earlier. This is obviously why. He's like, he got the cruciform on him, but he was able to leave that place through like, I think painkillers or drugs or something. So he's basically in constant pain. He looks really sickly. But yeah, that is such a great way to start off the book. Had me hooked. Yeah. So it was my favorite story, and then we move on to like my least favorite story. Overall, Hyperion was a really great read. Like I said, I enjoyed it so much more in retrospect, which happens a lot with sci-fi books. That happened to me big time with God Emperor of Dune. Like, when you just think about what happened and how the story is weaved together, and like the world building especially, everything, every aspect is just extremely well done. I would highly recommend this book. I'm really curious to see where the Fall of Hyperion goes, because that one seems to be more mixed among the fan base. But I'm invested in the story, even though we didn't get much of the story. It was all like backstory, the first book, but now we'll get into the story, which I believe is like the war, the upcoming war with the ousters and the hegemony. I want to see the conclusion of all these people's stories. I would give Hyperion, whilst I was reading it, I was thinking it was like an 8. After finishing it, it gets definitely a 9 out of 10. So if you love sci-fi, you will absolutely love this book, I think. Go read it. And if you don't really read sci-fi, I would still recommend it because it's got so much in there to appeal to different types of people. Let me know what you thought of Hyperion. For me personally, I loved the book, but I'm not sure if I would say it's one of my favorite sci-fis after reading it. It might become one of my favorite series. I'm going to take a small break before I read The Fall of Hyperion. But yeah, let me know what you thought of the first book, and if you've read the rest of the series, what you thought of it. I'm very curious about The Fall of Hyperion and Endymion and The Rise of Endymion. So, more reviews to come, loads more. But I hope you enjoyed, and peace.